Hello, my friend. Welcome to Learn English Through History. Find a quiet place. Let your shoulders fall. Take one slow breath in, and then let it go. Tonight, we will walk into old laboratories, dark farms, and one small room where a frightened child waited for an answer. Listen gently. You do not need to understand every word. Just follow the story, one clear step at a time. Imagine that you are 9 years old. It is the summer of 1885. You live in a small town in eastern France. One morning, a dog runs toward you. Its mouth is open. White liquid falls from its teeth. Before anyone can stop it, the animal attacks. It bites you again and again, 14 times. Your mother pulls you away. Your body is hurt, but another danger is already moving inside you. No one can see it. If the sickness reaches your brain, there is almost no hope. People call the sickness rabies. Rabies is a deadly disease that can pass from an infected animal to a person through a bite. Your mother hears about a scientist in Paris. He is not a medical doctor. He cannot promise a cure. His treatment has never been used on a human being. Yet she takes your hand and begins the long journey to find him. The scientist looks at the child. He knows the danger. He also knows that one wrong choice could kill the boy and destroy years of work. On his table are pieces of dried tissue from sick rabbits. In those small pieces may be the answer, or there may be nothing. The man standing beside the table is Louis Pasteur. Many people remember him as a father of microbiology. Microbiology is the study of very small living things. But Pasteur did not begin his life as a great fighter against disease. He began as a quiet boy who liked to draw faces. Louis was born on December 27, 1822, in Dole, France. His family later lived in Arbois, a town near green hills and vineyards. His father, Jean-Joseph, worked as a tanner. The tanner turns animal skin into leather. The work was hard, wet, and often unpleasant. Strong smells filled the workshop. Louis saw that useful things could come from patient, careful labor. At school, Louis was not known as a young genius. He was serious, but his first love was art. He made portraits of family members and people in his town. A portrait is a picture of a person. He watched faces closely. He noticed lines, light, and small differences. This habit of looking carefully would later guide all his science. His teachers saw that he could do more. Louis left home to study, but Paris felt cold and lonely. He missed his family so much that he returned. It may look like a failure. It was not. He prepared again, grew stronger, and went back to his studies. He learned an early lesson. A step backward does not always mean the journey is over. In 1843, he entered the École Normale Supérieure in Paris. 4 years later, he earned a doctorate in science. A doctorate is the highest university degree in a subject. He was still only in his 20s, and his first great enemy was not a disease. It was a puzzle inside a crystal. Some crystals turned light in one direction. Other crystals, made from almost the same material, did not. Louis sat at a table and separated tiny crystal shapes by hand. It was slow work. He used a small tool and looked again and again. He discovered that some crystals were like left and right hands. They looked similar, but one was the mirror image of the other. A molecule is a very small group of atoms joined together. Pasteur understood that molecules could have different shapes in space. Today, this idea is important in chemistry and medicine. But at that time, it was new. The young man who once studied faces was now studying the hidden shape of matter. The crystals came from tartaric acid, a material connected with winemaking. Under normal light, the small pieces looked almost the same. Pasteur noticed one tiny edge that pointed in a different direction. Other people had seen the crystals before, but they had not treated that edge as the answer to a large question. He sorted the crystals into 2 groups. It took patience. One small mistake could mix the groups again. Then he put each group into liquid and passed special light through it. One liquid turned the light to the right, the other turned it to the left. When he mixed them, the two effects balanced each other. An older scientist checked the work. Pasteur repeated the test before him. The result held. This is an important part of science. A beautiful idea is not enough. Another person must be able to follow the method and see the result. Pasteur felt great joy, but his joy came from a very small sign. He had trusted a detail that others passed over. The lesson stayed with him. Nature often speaks quietly. The scientist must learn how to listen. This was a victory. It also opened a larger door. If tiny differences could change the way light moved, perhaps tiny living things could change the world around us. Soon, a factory problem would pull Louis through that door. In 1854, Pasteur became dean of a science faculty in Lille, an industrial city in northern France. A dean is a leader in a university department. Local makers of alcohol came to him with a problem. Sometimes their liquid became good alcohol. Sometimes it became sour and useless. They wanted to know why. Many scientists believed fermentation was only a chemical change. Fermentation is a process in which very small living things change sugar into other substances, such as alcohol or acid. Pasteur put drops of the factory liquid under a microscope. A microscope is a tool that makes very small things look larger. He saw different forms in good liquid and bad liquid. Round yeast cells were active in healthy alcohol. Other small forms appeared when the liquid turned sour. These were microbes. A microbe is a living thing so small that we usually need a microscope to see it. The factory workers did not need a long debate. They needed good alcohol. Pasteur visited their rooms and looked at the large containers. He smelled sweet liquid in one place and sharp, sour liquid in another. He took samples back to his table. Under the microscope, the difference became visible. This changed the direction of his life. Crystals were quiet and fixed. Microbes grew, moved, ate, and changed their surroundings. The laboratory now felt less like a room of objects and more like a hidden farm. Pasteur also learned that microbes did not all need the same conditions. Some worked with oxygen. Others could live without it. Oxygen is a gas in the air that humans and many other living things need. This discovery helped explain why fermentation could happen deep inside a container, where little air was present. He wrote that fermentation was connected with life. That claim sounded bold. It meant that the worker inside the wine was not only a chemical force, it was a living cell. If that cell was healthy, the process could succeed. If another microbe entered, the whole container could fail. Pasteur began to understand a simple but powerful idea. Different microbes cause different changes. The bad liquid was not failing by chance. Something alive was doing the work. He tested the idea many times. He changed the food, the air, and the heat. He watched what happened. Science can be exciting, but much of it is also repetition. Wash the glass. Prepare the liquid. Wait. Look. Right. Then do it again. The work led him into a famous argument. Many people believed in spontaneous generation. This was the idea that life could appear by itself from non-living matter. If soup became full of microbes, they thought the microbes simply came from the soup. Pasteur designed glass bottles with long curved necks. The bottles became known as Swan-Neck flasks because their necks looked like the neck of a swan. Air could enter, but dust stayed in the curve. When Pasteur boiled liquid inside and left the curved neck unbroken, the liquid stayed clear. When dust reached the liquid, microbes grew. Life had not appeared from nothing. The microbes had traveled on dust in the air. Pasteur showed the flasks to other scientists. A clear bottle looked simple, but it carried a strong message. Air itself did not create life. Something in the air entered with dust. The curve in the glass acted like a trap. Some people were not convinced. They said the boiling had changed the air or damaged the liquid. Pasteur changed the test. He opened some flasks. He tilted others so the liquid touched the trapped dust. Microbes soon appeared where dust reached the food. The liquid in protected flasks stayed clear. Every change answered one objection, but it also opened a new question. If microbes could enter a bottle, could they also enter a wound? Could they move from a dirty tool to a human body? Pasteur was not yet ready to answer all of this. Other doctors and scientists would help build that bridge, but the direction was becoming clear. The invisible enemy now had a road. It could move through air, water, hands, tools, and food. This idea challenged old beliefs. Some scientists attacked Pasteur. He answered with more tests, more bottles, and more careful notes. Yet proving that microbes existed was only the beginning. Could people stop them? French winemakers had a serious problem. Wine and beer could spoil before they were sold. Pasteur found that unwanted microbes were changing the drinks. He discovered that moderate heat could destroy many of these microbes without boiling the liquid. This process became known as pasteurization. Pasteurization means heating food or drink for a set time to reduce harmful microbes. Pasteur first used the idea to protect wine. Later, versions of the process were used for milk and many other foods. Think about a bottle of milk in a shop today. It seems far from a dark laboratory in 19th century France. But the name on that process still carries the memory of the man who watched liquid spoil. While his public work grew, Pasteur and his wife Marie lived through private pain. They had 5 children. 3 died young. 2 daughters, Jeanne and Cécile, died from typhoid fever. Their child Camille died from a liver tumor. Pasteur did not write a simple line, saying that these deaths caused all his later work. History is rarely that neat. Still, he was not studying disease from a safe emotional distance. He was also a father who knew the silence left by a child. Marie was an important partner in his life. She cared for the family, helped with his writing, and supported long years of work. Late nights in a laboratory do not belong to one person alone. Someone waits. Someone keeps the home together. Someone believes before the public does. Then France asked Pasteur to face a new disaster. In the South, silkworms were dying. The silk industry depended on these small animals. Families lost their work. Boxes that should have held healthy worms held dark, sick bodies instead. Pasteur knew almost nothing about silkworms when he began. He traveled to the affected area and studied the insects, their eggs, and the leaves they ate. At first, the problem confused him. Then he found that there were 2 different diseases, not one. Tiny organisms were connected to the sickness. He taught farmers to examine the adult moths and their eggs. Sick stock had to be separated from healthy stock. Clean practice mattered. Selection mattered. The answer was not one magic bottle. It was a careful system. Pasteur spent long days in hot rooms filled with trays. Silkworms ate mulberry leaves around him. A mulberry is a tree whose leaves are the main food of silkworms. Farmers brought him insects from different villages. Some worms looked healthy. Others were weak and covered with dark spots. At first, his advice did not always work. He made errors. The problem seemed to change from one box to the next. That was because 2 diseases were present. One could pass through the eggs. The other spread in a different way and became worse in dirty, crowded conditions. The difference mattered. If Pasteur treated 2 enemies as one enemy, the farmers would continue to lose their worms. He returned to the microscope. He compared moths, eggs, and dead insects. Slowly, the pattern became clearer. He advised producers to let the moths lay their eggs on separate pieces of cloth. Afterward, they could examine each mother moth. If signs of disease appeared, they could destroy the eggs from that moth. Healthy eggs could be kept for the next season. This was slow work for the farmers too. It asked them to change an old way of life, but healthy groups began to return. The silk did not come back because of luck. It came back because people learned to see a hidden chain and remove one weak link. This lesson was larger than silk. An invisible cause could create a visible disaster. But if people found the cause, they could change their actions. They could clean tools. They could separate the sick from the healthy. they could break the road of disease. In 1868, during these years of work, Pasteur suffered a stroke. A stroke happens when blood cannot move correctly in part of the brain. His left side became partly paralyzed. For a man who depended on his hands and movement, this was a heavy blow. He was only 45. He could have stopped. Instead, after a period of rest, he returned to work, with help from his family and assistants. His body moved with more difficulty, but his questions did not become smaller. Recovery was not quick. He had to teach his body how to move again. Walking required effort. The left hand that once sorted tiny crystals could no longer work in the same way. Simple daily acts took time. His assistants became even more important. They could carry out movements that he could not. Pasteur could still plan tests, study results, and challenge weak explanations. He learned to place more trust in other hands. There is a quiet kind of courage here. He did not defeat the stroke in one dramatic moment. He lived beside its effects. He adjusted. He returned to the next question, then the next. The invisible enemies had not left, and neither had he. This part of the story matters. Pasteur is often shown alone, standing above a table with perfect confidence. Real science did not look like that. He worked with people such as Émile Roux and Charles Chamberlain. They prepared cultures, cared for animals, argued about methods, and repeated tests. A laboratory is a team, even when history remembers one name. By the late 1870s, Pasteur was studying diseases in animals. One was fowl cholera, a disease that killed chickens. His team grew the responsible bacteria in laboratory cultures. A culture is a prepared material in which microbes can grow. An old culture of the bacteria became weak. When chickens received it, they became ill, but did not die. Later, the team gave the same chickens fresh, dangerous bacteria. The chickens survived. Other chickens, which had not received the weak culture, died. The result was astonishing. A weakened enemy could train the body to fight a stronger enemy later. The body could remember. Pasteur called this method vaccination, in honor of Edward Jenner, who had earlier used cowpox to protect people from smallpox. A vaccine is a preparation that teaches the body's defenses to recognize and fight a disease. Pasteur did not invent the first vaccination, but he helped show how scientists could develop vaccines in a laboratory for different diseases. There was still a great distance between a chicken test and public trust. Farmers wanted proof they could see. Critics wanted Pasteur to fail. Soon, they would all stand together in a field. Anthrax was killing sheep and cattle. It was a terrible problem for farms. Pasteur's team developed a vaccine against it. In 1881, a public test was arranged at Puy-le-Fort, near Paris. Groups of farm animals were chosen. One group received the vaccine, the other group did not. Then all the animals were exposed to dangerous anthrax bacteria. The public test had two main groups of sheep. 25 had received the vaccine, and 25 had not. Other farm animals were included as well. Before the test, Pasteur's opponents were confident. Some believed the vaccinated animals would still die. A few thought the whole event was more theater than science. The challenge was dangerous for the team. A laboratory result can be checked quietly. A public field gives no place to hide. If the vaccine failed, farmers would lose trust. Scientists would use the failure against Pasteur's wider ideas about disease. After the dangerous bacteria were given, the animals returned to the field. The vaccinated group and the unprotected group stood under the same sky. They drank the same water. The difference was inside their bodies, where no visitor could see it. For 2 days, people waited. Imagine the field on the morning of June 2. Farmers, reporters, scientists, and doubters arrived. The vaccinated sheep were alive. The unprotected sheep were dead or dying. The difference stood in front of everyone. It was not a quiet result hidden in a paper. It was public and clear. The vaccine worked in that test. For farmers, the meaning was practical. A disease that could destroy a large part of a flock might be prevented. For scientists, the meaning was wider. A microbe could cause a specific disease, and a planned treatment could prepare an animal against it. Pasteur had turned an invisible idea into a field full of evidence. Yet even that bright day did not make every question disappear. The next enemy could not be grown in a simple bottle. It attacked the brain, and once it showed its face, it almost never let a person go. The crowd celebrated Pasteur, but success brought a harder question. Could his method protect a human life? Animal diseases were one thing. A frightened child was another. Pasteur chose to study rabies. The disease affected animals and humans. It was rare, but people feared it deeply. After symptoms began, death was almost certain. The cause was so small that Pasteur could not see it with his microscopes. Today we know it is a virus. A virus is a tiny infectious agent that can only make more copies inside living cells. The invisible enemy had become even more invisible. Pasteur and his team passed the disease from animal to animal so they could study it. They used rabbits. They took infected spinal cord tissue and dried it for different lengths of time. Older, drier tissue had weaker activity. Fresher tissue was stronger. The team tested a series of preparations on dogs. They began with weaker material and slowly moved to stronger material. The animals developed protection. Pasteur hoped the same method might work after a bite, before the disease reached the brain. But hope was not proof, and Pasteur was a chemist, not a physician. A physician is a medical doctor who is trained to treat people. He feared testing the method on a human being. Then, on July 6, 1885, Joseph Meister arrived with his mother. Joseph was 9 years old. A rabid dog had bitten him 14 times. A local doctor had treated the wounds, but there was no reliable way to stop rabies. His mother had heard about Pasteur's experiments and traveled to Paris. Pasteur examined the danger and spoke with doctors. Because he was not a physician, Dr. Jacques-Joseph Grancher gave the injections. Pasteur watched and carried the weight of the decision. The first preparation was weak. It came from rabbit spinal cord tissue that had dried for many days. Over the next 10 days, Joseph received 13 injections. Each preparation was stronger than the one before. An injection puts medicine into the body through a needle. For Joseph, every injection was both a danger and a hope. There was no fast moment of victory. The boy did not rise from the bed under a bright light while a crowd cheered. He had to wait. Pasteur had to wait too. Rabies could take time to appear. Each healthy morning was good news, but it was not yet an answer. Imagine Pasteur at night. Perhaps the laboratory was quiet. The bottles stood on their shelves. He had fought microbes in wine, silkworms, chickens, and sheep. Now the life of one child rested near the center of his work. He knew what it meant for a family to lose a child, but feeling that pain could not prove his science. Only time could do that. Joseph did not develop rabies. The treatment had succeeded. A second boy, Jean-Baptiste Jupilla, was treated later that year after he was badly bitten while protecting other shepherds from a rabid dog. He also survived. News traveled quickly. People bitten by possibly rabid animals came to Paris from many places. Some had little money. Some did not speak French. All carried the same fear. Pasteur's small rooms could not serve them all. Public donations came from around the world. The money helped create the Institut Pasteur in Paris. The institute opened in 1888 as a place for treatment, research, and teaching. An institute is an organization created for a special kind of work or study. Pasteur saw its doors open. Scientists there continued to study disease long after his death in 1895. The work grew beyond one man, one table, and one city. Louis Pasteur did not discover every germ. He did not work alone. Edward Jenner came before him in vaccination. Robert Koch and many others also built the science of microbes and disease. Good history leaves room for all these people. Still, Pasteur connected many worlds. He moved from crystals to fermentation, from spoiled wine to sick silkworms, and from animal vaccines to protection against rabies. He showed that careful work with invisible life could bring visible change. His story also changed daily habits. Clean tools mattered. Clean hands mattered. Heat could protect food. A weak or inactive form of an enemy could prepare the body for a future attack. These ideas helped medicine, farming, and food production move into a new age. Now return to your own English journey. At first, a new language can feel like Pasteur's invisible world. You hear sounds, but you cannot hold them. You meet a word today, and tomorrow it seems gone. The rules feel hidden. You may think nothing is changing. But imagine your mind as a quiet laboratory. Every short story is one small experiment. Every new word is a sample on the table. You listen once. You do not understand everything. You listen again, and one sound becomes clear. That is not failure. That is observation. Pasteur did not solve his questions with one great look through a microscope. He prepared, watched, wrote, and repeated. You can learn in the same way. 10 calm minutes today can prepare you for 10 more tomorrow. A difficult sentence becomes weaker when you meet it again. A strange word becomes familiar when it returns in a new story. Your progress may be hard to see, but it is alive. So keep a small notebook if you can. Write one word from this story. Perhaps microbe, perhaps vaccine, perhaps patient. Say it slowly. Use it in one simple sentence. Then come back another day. Which part of Pasteur's journey helped you most? A. He returned after early difficulty. B. He continued after his stroke. C. He used careful science to protect a child. Write A, B, or C in the comments. You can also write one short reason. Your English does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be yours. Thank you for spending this quiet time with me. Rest now, or carry one small idea into your day. What is invisible can still be growing. Keep listening, keep noticing, keep building your laboratory of words. I will meet you in the next story, here, at Learn English Through History.